Part 4, Aithiawi. Chapter 8, The Thrill. When Aithiawi Go turned 13, she became increasingly impatient for something more. She was fairly normal for a rich country kid on Erissus 3, and rich had become boring. There had to be something more to life than the sheltered existence she'd experienced up until now. Something more intoxicating than the drinking binges and the recreational drugs. Something more than the rush of gambling with her father's money. And definitely something more than these mundane, sex-crazed high school boys. Aithiawi wanted something truly exciting in her life. The only thing was, she didn't exactly know what that should be. Aithiawi's parents, if they'd ever bothered to notice, would have been horrified with what their child was doing with her young life when compared to the beginnings of their own teen years. However, her father was off-planet on some business trip again, and her mother was too engrossed with her newest lover to be concerned about her blossoming daughter. Aithiawi didn't care, though. She didn't need her parents' attention. She had their money. And at a healthy height of almost 2 meters, with the willowy beginnings of a curvy build, glowing dark skin, a long, thick crown of tightly curled black hair, stunning good looks, and irresistible charm, Aithiawi had no lack of other people clamoring for her attention. But all of that was starting to matter less and less. The good and the bad. Lately, Aithiawi wanted, no, she needed something else. This strange, new, and vigorous hunger for something more to life, for some spark to enliven her days, consumed all her thought. And compelled by this bursting desire for a more invigorating life, she called up 12 of her closest friends to organize a different kind of outing. Then after a quick lunch, she dismissed her manservant, and with a rebellious sense of freedom, ordered a driver to retrieve her from her family's estate. Woo-hoo! Aithiawi howled as she soared through the sky, gripping tightly to the steering bar of her delta wing. This was the first time she'd ever been gliding, though she'd seen it plenty of times before, whenever she and her friends came out to the cliffs of Fire Canyon to get high, which was a lot. She caught another thermal updraft rising from the volcanic chasm far below, but due to her inexperience, her delta wing bucked wildly and she struggled to control the sudden increase in speed and altitude. A flash of fear sent a chill down her spine. Goosebumps covered her skin. Her heart and her lungs pumped fast and hard as if she was running the last leg of a race. Was this the something else she craved? "How high can you go?" she yelled, joyfully challenging her friends. Aithiawi's best friend, a little sprite of a boy named Yandin, answered the challenge. Although this was his first time gliding too, he seemed to have taken to his delta wing like he was born with the skill. Flying smooth circles around Aithiawi, Yandin spiraled higher and higher until his delta wing disappeared in the glare of the bright midday sun. Taunting his dearest chum, Yandin yelled, laughing, "You're too fat and slow, Safine! If I'm fat, then you're handsome!" she countered from below. Laughter filled the sky as all the youths taunted Yandin, mocking his efforts to best Aithiawi in a game of jests. She had the quickest wit out of any in this close group of friends, and always seemed to get the last word in. So Yandin wisely and quickly changed his tactics. "Bet you 3,000 suns I pass 2 kilometers before you do," he shouted. And at that, the game was on. Each and every one of these teens came from a wealthy family, but 3,000 suns was still a lot of money. All the kids laughed, hollering their vows to win this new contest. And many joined the challenge by falling in behind Yandin to spiral up toward the sun. Others spread out to find strong updrafts of their own to ride up into the skies on their colorful, reflective delta wings, all eyes focused intently on digital altimeters. "No fair!" Aithiawi called back. "You can't bet on the game after you start before everyone else." Laughter and jeers filled the skies once again. With 3,000 suns on the line, Aithiawi would get no mercy today. Grinning widely, she thought for half a second, and then angled her delta wing lower in imitation of a move she'd seen professional gliders perform out above Fire Canyon many, many times. The idea behind the technique was simple. Swoop down to rapidly catch a strong updraft low to the lava flow. Near the bottom of your dive, quickly angle your glider slightly back up, not quite parallel to the molten river, and fill your wing with the hottest streams of rising heat. When done just right, Aithiawi had seen gliders soar past 2 kilometers and more in short seconds. She couldn't lose. Diving swiftly towards Fire Canyon, she looked around for an open patch of bright red lava where the updraft was sure to be strongest. There, about half a meter ahead through dreamy columns of rising steam. Wobbling a little less now that she'd gotten a better feel for piloting the thing, Aithiawi angled her glider down a bit more and entered a power dive. With goggles snug over her eyes, warm winds rushed past her upturned face, and her thick, tightly curled hair flittered in the air behind her as she sailed through a rainbow wearing a dazzling smile of supreme youthful joy. Seeing their most cherished friend plummet out of the sky startled all the others. They called out frantically and abandoned their contest to chase after her, though in a more cautious manner. Yandin, of course, took the lead. "Seth!" he yelled down. "What are you doing? Pull up!" Aithiawi heard their voices, but they were too far away and the wind was too loud to make out their meanings. She just figured her friends were yelling more insults at her efforts, so as she plunged below the tree line, she turned her body and stuck out her arm. With her hand balled into a fist, palm facing her friends, she extended her pinky finger straight up in a vulgar sign common to most cultures on Erissus 3. Seeing this, Aithiawi's friends erupted with laughter and shouted insults back down to her as they leveled out their gliders. But not Yandin. Though greatly relieved by his friend's confidence, he continued to descend quietly and with concern, worried that Aithiawi might be putting herself in more danger than her fledgling delta wing skills could handle. Aithiawi, however, had no such concerns. Putting all her weight to one side so she could see her friends and flip them off, tilted the delta wing too much in one direction, and she spun into a sharp, wobbly downward spiral. "Whoa, Betty!" she said to her glider. Another flash of fear sent more tingles down her spine. Her heart thumped heavily against the insides of her ribcage, and a head rush of blood sharpened her vision. Her free hand instinctively shot forward to grab the steering bar to level the glider out, but a new updraft rocketed skyward and hit hard under the higher end of her wing to overwhelm her control. The glider pitched dramatically, turning parallel to Fire Canyon's rising winds. Then it dropped like a dart past the cliff tops and down into the colossal volcanic rift. "Safine!" Yandin screamed. He angled his glider into a power dive, hoping to somehow save his friend before she plummeted to a fiery death. The rest of her friends, high above the developing tragedy, shrieked and yelled down various bits of advice to help. But the sounds and their meanings got lost in the rushing winds and the distance. A few of Aithiawi's friends angled their gliders back over to Fire Canyon's cliff tops, yelling for their distant, waiting drivers to call for emergency assistance. The few drivers that weren't asleep in their air-conditioned vehicles on this hot summer's day looked jealously at their young flying clients and dismissed them for rich, little spoiled fools. The drivers turned up the audio on their music systems or rolled up their car windows, having no desire to join in the brats' fun. They weren't babysitters after all. "Level out!" Yandin wailed as he tried to close the distance to Aithiawi's tumbling glider. Somehow, his words made it down to her clearly. "I'm trying!" she yelled back. "Can't you see I'm trying?" With her lips bunched tightly against her teeth, Aithiawi flailed about as she tried to shift her weight to regain control of her delta wing. She grabbed at different parts of the frame and pulled at different parts of the wing itself, trying anything to level the glider out again. Anything not to die. Hot winds roared past her ears. The canyon's jagged rock walls rushed higher into the sky. The mottled black and red molten river grew quickly in her view. "Put on your mask!" Yandin shouted. As a precaution, Every Delta Wing rented near the cliffs of Fire Canyon came with a strap-on pressurized air tank and a breathing mask to prevent a pilot from being overcome in case one flew too close to the noxious fumes of the molten river.
The mask! Right!
Aithiawi's hands moved desperately, finding the breathing mask in an instant. She quickly strapped it around the back of her head and secured the mask over her nose and mouth. The device was well designed, and once fitted, cool, fresh air filled her lungs. Yanden followed suit, but then it dawned on him that he might not even get to her in time. And what would he do if he did manage to reach her? What could he do? He closed his eyes for a second, pushed the doubt from his mind, and leaned deeper into his dive, tongue sticking from the corner of his mouth. First things first, he'd worry about what to do once he got there. Falling fast below her friend, through the more turbulent winds lower in the canyon, Aithiawi looked from a distance, like she was emerging from a cocoon strapped to a giant triangular kite. And like a flailing kite in rough weather, her Delta Wing whipped about in wild U-turns, flips, dips, rises, and dives. Aithiawi became completely disoriented. She couldn't tell which direction was which, had no idea what to do to make her Delta Wing right itself, and froze with fear. The glider flipped and spun, and then moved into a lasting sideways swing. The motion held long enough for Aithiawi to realize she was finally facing down, with the glider above her. This realization just about turned into happiness when the side of her Delta Wing smashed into the canyon wall. The glider's frame and the wing's reflective material made a terrifying, crunching, crackling sound as the small craft broke up against the towering, rocky cliff. Aithiawi was stunned. Her Delta Wing was totaled. Useless. Rebounding back into the air after the impact, her glider circled lazily away from the rocky wall, slowly rolled over, damaged side down, and spiraled into the fiery gorge. The breathing mask covering half her face did little to muffle Aithiawi's terrified screams. The fall seemed to last forever. She looked up to see the cliffs of Fire Canyon spinning round and round in a nauseating dance with the sky. And then she saw Yanden, leaning with all his might into a power dive, trying to save her. Sweet, beautiful Yanden. He loved her with all his heart. She knew he did. And she also knew at this very moment that she loved him with every fiber of her being. The sudden realization that she was about to die and that Yanden would watch her burn jerked her back into the moment. She had to do everything in her power to prevent that from happening. She had to find a way to live. She reached out to try to straighten the broken frame of the Delta Wing, but the rushing winds of her fall against the folded half of the glider was just too much for her slender, teenaged arms to overcome. She decided to try her legs. Holding tightly to the steering frame, she bent as much as she could at the waist and grabbed for the zipper to her Delta Wing's flight harness so she could free her legs. Plap! The broad, flat topside of the Delta Wing slapped onto the cooling surface of Fire Canyon's molten bottom. Its broken half pointed straight up. Aithiawi laid on her back on what is normally considered to be the underside of the glider. Tiny drops of warm water from a fall at the top of the cliffs splashed against her goggled and masked face. Both her hands gripped the steering bar now above her with a strength only the fear of death could produce. Aithiawi gawked wild-eyed through the steamy air at the jagged strip of sky between the canyon walls. Shocked to be alive. Then she noticed the steering bar. She doesn't remember grabbing it with her free hand. The reflective material of the Delta Wing under her began to heat up rapidly, and the young girl's survival instincts kicked in. She unstrapped herself from the glider, unzipped the flight harness, kicked her legs free, and stood up, uneasily, fighting to find her balance on the uncertain surface. The tip of the Delta Wing, resting on the hellish river, pushed into the black top of the cooling magma. A bright blob of red lava spurted up onto it like the tongue of a lazy toad. Surrounded by molten rock, the heat-resistant material of the Delta Wing stretched and snapped away from its frame. Little flames danced at the curling edges of the wing's material. A blast of hotter heat hit Aithiawi on the side of the face. The fiercest urgency now possessed her body and mind. She looked around frantically and found to her amazement that she'd landed not too far away from the mouth of a cave with a solid floor above the molten river. Without thinking, Aethioe kicked the broken wing of the glider flat onto the river's surface, snatched up the flight harness, and ran toward the cave. She threw the flight harness onto a cooled patch of lava between the glider and the cave and leapt into the air right after. The harness landed with a dull puff. The bottom of it instantly burst into flames. Aethioe's foot barely settled on the bag before she was back in the air again. Just clearing the superheated bank of Fire Canyon's molten river, she hit the solid rock of the cave's floor and rolled a couple of times to slam into a rocky wall some distance inside the cave's entrance. Resting with her head, neck, and shoulders on the hot stony ground, her back against the cave's wall, Aethioe looked at her legs bent above her and roared with triumphant joy. Her clothes were drenched with water and sweat. She scrambled to her feet and skittered back to the edge of the lava flow to flag down Yondon so he could see she survived. She spotted him through the haze and smoke and steamed and jumped up and down to catch his attention. The pressurized air tank banged against the small of her back. She didn't even notice as she waved her arms and shouted through her breathing mask. Yondon saw her and risked a quick wave before the wobble of his glider forced him to re-grab his steering bar. Bobbing erratically through the chaotic air currents near the bottom of Fire Canyon, he managed to keep his glider some several meters above the lava's surface. As he passed Aethioe by, he jabbed his index finger upwards twice and then jabbed his finger twice at her.
Yeah, get help, and then come get me,
she yelled through the mask. Yondon nodded, angled his delta wings slightly up, and shot rapidly skyward by the intense heat of Fire Canyon's river of molten rock. Aethioe laughed passionately. This was it. This was exactly the kind of thing she was looking for. This was the spark of life she needed, and oh, was she alive. Then suddenly, a nearby burst of lava caused her to jump back. A wave of heat, followed by globs of molten rock arcing through the air. Aethioe skipped back rapidly as lava splashed on the rocky volcanic ground where she just was. Then abruptly, she bumped into something behind her. Not rock. Aethioe turned to see a group of 6 people dressed in shiny aluminum suits with fully enclosed hoods. She couldn't really see their faces through the hoods, but their postures clearly revealed their surprise at what they just saw happen. The figure closest to Aethioe quickly shook off his awe, rushed forward, grabbed her by the wrist, and pulled her further into the cave. Aethioe started to protest. "Hey! What do you think you're—" But the strong figure skillfully yanked her off balance with one arm and sidestepped behind her in one fluid motion. Aethioe felt a sharp shooting pain behind her ear. A bright flash of white filled her vision. Then there was nothing.